Huh. Other girls don't think about how very beautiful women are? Huh.
Hi, I'm Emily, and I use she, her pronouns. Today we're going to be continuing our series going through the letters of the LGBTQIA+ acronym, and right now we're on the letter B for bisexual. We'll talk about the labels bisexual and polysexual today, and then next week we're going to make a part 2 of this video, when we'll cover 2 more identities, pansexual and omnisexual. For today's video, we have a very special guest joining us from Virginia. Kara, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Kara, and I use she, her pronouns.
So are you ready to talk about the bisexual and polysexual identities?
Yeah, but before we start talking about the individual labels, what do all of these identities have in common? Like, why are we grouping them all together?
Yeah, well, bisexual, polysexual, pansexual, and omnisexual are all different kinds of multisexual identities. And multisexual just means that someone is attracted to more than one gender.
But each of these 4 labels means something slightly different.
Right. So bisexual is maybe the label that a lot of people are the most familiar with, and bisexual has a couple of different meanings. The first one is that being bisexual can mean you're attracted to 2 genders. Like maybe you're attracted to men and women, or you're attracted to women and demigirls, or any other 2 genders.
And just to prevent any confusion, just because the word bisexual has the prefix bi in it, meaning 2, it doesn't mean there are only 2 genders.
Yeah, I've heard it explained that this definition of bisexual is kind of like being bilingual. If you're bilingual, you speak 2 languages, but of course there are a ton of other languages out there that you don't know how to speak. In the same way, if you're attracted to 2 genders, there are still a ton of other genders out there that you're just not attracted to.
Okay, so then what's the other definition of the word bisexual?
The other definition is that being bisexual means you're attracted to 2 or more genders. I've heard some people who use the term bisexual this way explain it like they're attracted to their own gender and also other genders.
Okay, so a lot of different people can use the word bisexual.
Yeah, and it just depends on your personal preference and whatever makes you feel the most comfortable.
And you might also hear the word bisexual used as an umbrella term for bisexual and similar identities.
Yeah, and that's why we're covering all these different identities now as we're talking about the B in LGBTQIA+. A lot of people feel like the B in the acronym covers all these multisexual identities.
So then can we talk about the difference between bisexual and polysexual?
So the word polysexual means you're attracted to multiple, but not all genders. And that makes sense when you think about the word because the prefix poly means many.
Like, you could be attracted to men and different kinds of non-binary people and call yourself polysexual.
Yeah, or you could be attracted to any other combination of genders.
And just to clarify, polysexual is a different thing from polyamorous.
Yeah, the 2 words sound similar, but they mean different things. We might talk about polyamory in a later video, but basically, if you're polyamorous, then you're open to being in romantic relationships with multiple people at the same time. The word polysexual is just about how many genders you're attracted to.
Okay, so polysexual is pretty similar to bisexual then, but just a little different. Could someone use both labels for themselves?
Yeah, you can definitely identify as both bi and poly.
So, can we go through some examples of why someone might want to use one label over the other?
Yeah, of course. One reason is that the word bisexual is generally more well known and better understood in a lot of communities. So some people might want to use the word bisexual because they feel like they won't have to explain themselves every time they come out to someone.
And the word bisexual has been around a little longer than polysexual, right?
Well, the word bisexual was first used to describe an attraction to 2 genders in 1892 when a man named Charles Gilbert Chaddock was translating a work called Psychopathia Sexualis. We'll put a picture of him here that we got from Wikipedia, but as far as I can tell from my research, the word polysexual has been around since the 1920s or 1930s. So there's a little gap between those 2 terms, but not too much.
Okay, but have the bisexual and polysexual flags been around for that long, or are those more recent?
The flags are more recent, like a lot of pride flags. The bisexual flag was created in 1998 by Michael Page, and the flag has 3 colors: pink, purple, and blue. So going in that order, the colors stand for attraction to your own gender, attraction to 2 genders, and attraction to a different gender from your own.
Okay, and the polysexual flag is a little newer?
Yeah, the poly flag was created in 2012 by a Tumblr user named Samlin, and it also has 3 colors: pink, green, and blue. Those colors stand for attraction to women, people outside of the gender binary, and men.
So, going back to why someone might want to use one label over another, could someone want to use the polysexual label because it feels more open to the whole spectrum of gender instead of just the binary of men and women?
Yeah, that's one reason why someone could prefer the label polysexual over bisexual.
But the label bisexual is still open to that whole gender spectrum. It's not exclusive of trans or non-binary people.
No, it's not trans or non-binary exclusive. This is again just where things go back to personal preferences.
So someone might also like one label over another because they like how specific or vague different labels are.
Right. Like, to me, the label bisexual feels more vague and open-ended because it does have those different meanings. You can use it in different ways, while the term polysexual feels more specific and concrete.
So are there any other terms we should talk about before we move on to talking about our own personal experience?
Yeah, I think one good term to know is the label bi-curious, which I think means about what it sounds like.
Bi-curious, like curious about whether you could be bi?
Yeah, kind of. Like, if a straight person identifies as bi-curious, then that means they're curious about or open to having a relationship with someone of their own gender or of another gender that they're not typically attracted to.
But someone who identifies as gay could also use the bi-curious label.
Yeah, it can go either way.
So is bi-curious similar to the label heteroflexible then?
Yeah, the word heteroflexible is really similar. It just refers specifically to someone who is straight but who's open to having same-sex relationships.
That's cool then. It's like you're being curious and trying to explore your sexuality instead of trying to fit your sexuality into this one box.
Yeah, and another thing that makes me think of, and I'm going to try to explain this as best I can, is with somewhat flexible labels like bisexual and polysexual, and really with any labels concerning like sexual orientation, it's important to remember that these are words we're trying to use to describe sexuality, which is something that really goes beyond words. Like, you can't fully describe it in words that we come up with. One analogy I've heard is that the spectrum of sexual orientations is like the color spectrum. There aren't really boundaries between different colors when you just look at the whole spectrum. It kind of all blurs together. But we categorize the spectrum into different groups of colors with names like red, purple, blue, so that we can communicate better and actually talk about the world around us. Sexual orientations are kind of the same way. The words that we use to describe our sexual orientations are just words, and they don't define us or box us in, but they do make it easier for us to communicate and talk about our experiences with one another.
So you're saying not to feel pressure about trying to fit into any specific sexual orientation label.
Right. I just think it's important to remember, if you're someone who's questioning or trying to figure out what label fits you best, that there's no pressure and that you don't need to be intimidated by all these different labels, because however you identify is valid.
And speaking of how you identify, we both identify as bisexual.
Yeah, bisexual is one of the labels that I use.
And I am also bisexual.
So, when you call yourself bisexual, what does that mean for you? Because it can mean different things for different people.
So calling myself bisexual means that I am attracted to more than one gender. I'm attracted to women, men, and other genders.
Okay, cool. So we each use the label bisexual a little differently then, because I know when I use the label bisexual for myself, I mean that I'm specifically attracted to 2 genders, women and non-binary people.
So is there anything that appeals to you about the bi label specifically?
Yeah, I think I like how the label bisexual feels kind of open-ended, because I know that I'm still learning about my sexuality, and the labels that I've used over time have changed a lot. So I realize that things could change a month or a year from now, so it's nice to have a bit of like wiggle room in what bisexual can mean for me.
Yeah, the openness of the label is where I'm most comfortable as I continue to grow in my sexuality.
So, do you use any other labels besides bisexual, or is bi the main label you use to talk about your sexual orientation?
So yeah, bi is the label I use specifically to identify my sexual orientation, but I'm also very comfortable with gay since I am attracted to the same gender as myself, and it tends to get the point across.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so what about you? Do you use other labels besides bi?
I think I have a pretty similar answer. There are a few other labels I use, like I call myself gay most of the time because it's simple and I feel like I don't have to explain myself at all. Sometimes I use lesbian. I actually realized while doing research for this video that I could also use the polysexual label for myself since I'm attracted to some genders but not all of them, so that's a thing too now. I do also identify as demisexual, which means I don't experience sexual attraction until I've developed a really deep emotional bond with someone. But we'll probably talk more about demisexuality in a later video when we cover asexuality.
That'll be a super important thing to cover and to learn about.
So, can I ask how long you've identified as bi or how long you've known you were bi?
So I've known I was bi since the beginning of my senior year of college, so nearly 2 years now. I've always known that I was attracted to men, and so it was easy to just be straight, through high school and everything, and through most of college. But with more experience and knowledge of the LGBTQ plus community, I figured out I was definitely not straight.
So, as you were going through that process of exploring your sexuality and figuring out what label fit you best, did you know right away that you were bi, like once you knew that you weren't straight? Or were there other labels that you used first and then kind of rejected or moved past?
So, bi was the first label I took after straight, and it has stuck ever since. I think that's largely due to the fact that I started understanding my sexual orientation a little later in life, and suddenly it made so much sense. It felt so right. And I've also really appreciated the fact that the label bisexual is commonly understood. Most people know what it means. And so it's the right amount of simplicity for me.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, one last question. Do you have any advice or guidance that you would give to someone who is maybe questioning their sexuality and trying to figure out whether they might be bi or not?
Well, one thing that did help me actually identify as bi was realizing that straight girls don't really think about kissing other girls. If you're wondering about your sexuality, that can be a strong indicator that you're not just attracted to the opposite gender. As far as identifying with bisexual versus other multisexualities, do whatever feels comfortable. Don't feel like you have to identify as bisexual to make others comfortable, but know that identifying as bisexual is an incredibly valid option with a wide range of meanings.
Yeah, that's great. So, Kara, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing some of your story and experience. And to everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us as well. If you identify as bisexual or polysexual, feel free to leave a message in the comments letting us know how we did explaining the terms, and let us know if there's anything you'd like us to add or specifically talk about in part 2 of this video next week.
And also leave a comment if you have any other questions, and be sure to subscribe for more videos like this one.
I'll see you next week with another incredible guest to talk about pansexuality and omnisexuality. So until then, stay safe and remember that you're valid however you identify.